Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas on how to lead your church into the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Now, here's your host, Lauren Richmond Jr.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. Today, I'm welcoming Matt Syrdal to the pod. Matt is a father of two and an ordained pastor living near the Front Range of the ancestral Rocky Mountains in Denver, Colorado. He has been influenced by the Christian mystical tradition, Jungian psychology, and the visionary lineage of Animas Valley Institute as a certified nature-based human development guide, currently in training as a soul initiation guide. In 2014, Matt founded Church of Lost Walls, a Denver wild church seeking to step across the threshold into a community based of sacred reciprocity, relationship with a watershed, wild sacramental worship, and a commitment to ecological education and justice. In 2014, Matt co-founded Seminary of the Wild, an eco-ministry leadership and movement hub for a wild spirituality. Matt has been a contributing writer for Progressive Christianity and is currently writing a book called Mythic Christ. In 2022, Matt began his life's work developing a mystery school and launching a year-long eco-depth training program called Awakening Mythic Imagination. Matt has been mentoring women and men through dreamwork, deep imagery, leadership coaching, ceremony and ritual, and personal mythwork as channels for accessing the deep self and living with greater authenticity and purpose in service to the world. All right, welcome to the show, Reverend Matt Syrdal. Thanks so much for being here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I'm enjoying the weather here in Colorado. So
Matt and I just had to work through some technical challenges, so we're making this roll as best we can. So if we both seem a little on edge, that's why. Matt, what else would you like our listeners to know about you?
yeah, so I'm I don't know, I'm just an ordinary family guy for the most part who lives on the Front Range of the ancestral Rocky Mountains, and I have a couple of girls who and I'm married and have a really great family, but I'm also an artist. I'm a poet, a mystic, a lover of the natural world, that whole thing. So I would just say core to who I am is I'm just a really curious individual about lots of different things, and I'd say my sense of faith is really rooted in a strong sense of awe and wonder, which are kind of my primary drivers. And I felt kind of this mysterious permission most of my life to follow the thread, so to speak, and it's taken me into some really interesting and wonderful terrain. And so I'm just excited to be here.
Awesome. Talk about your journey of faith, what that's looked like in the past, kind of what that looks like today.
Yeah, totally. Well, I grew up in the Presbyterian Church in Seattle from pretty early age, but I never really deeply resonated with it. There was always kind of a disconnect, I think, my childhood faith, and actually felt most connected with God, with the divine, through hours playing in the woods behind my childhood home.
Yeah.
I had kind of old growth forest right behind my house where I grew up. And then after college in my early 20s, I had a mystical experience, I guess you could say, that sort of reframed my life. And it actually led me into the church, like a little more seriously and a little more authentically. And so my kind of past experience of Christianity and faith has always been framed by Christian mysticism, and in particular, like its emphasis on experience and transformation.
Yeah.
And so Jesus has always been kind of an inner event and process as much as a historical person for me. And my earlier faith was pretty much influenced by Franciscan faith as well. And the whole deal. So I consider myself kind of a lifelong learner and seeker, and I've always felt like a bit of a misfit as well.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I'm guessing spiritual practices have something to do with being in the outdoors.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, spiritual practices. A big part of that is developing. I've kind of developed a wandering rhythm,
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of time spent outdoors. Not hiking per se, more walking attuned and in tune with what's happening in the natural world. And
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of a contemplative practice, a
Yeah.
contemplative discipline. And it's a way of um, experiencing the world as revelatory, as part
Mm-hmm.
of the divine's way of communicating with us. Um, Also, come a couple other personal practices that have been really influential in my life is dreamwork and deep
Mm-hmm.
imagery. And for me, dreams have always been kind of a primary form of communication with the divine, and I think it's something we haven't really, um, I don't know, championed or explored very much in the Christian church. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a place of wisdom for living and a way that we can experience wholeness, and that's how it's been in my own personal practice and with folks that I work with as well.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the biblical narrative is stock full of examples of people taking their dreams pretty seriously.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's right. I mean, Joseph and there's a whole host of others in the um, Bible, even including Peter, I think, um,
Yeah.
which we don't talk about a whole lot, but dreams were always accessed as a source of wisdom and guidance.
Yeah. Well, I had Matt on to talk about themes around eco spirituality, some of your projects you've done, but I want to start off, and this is a curveball, Matt, so hang with me here. Um, I just want to talk more about you used the word mystic, being a mystic. I wrote down just some of the words you described. You describe yourself as curious, someone who's shaped by awe and wonder. Talked about wandering. I have sort of started recently, and probably in the last few years, used the term mystic for myself as well. Perhaps maybe I might interpret that differently, but I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts on this. Us both serving in mainline Protestant contexts, how much that this tradition, at least maybe in the last 50 years, 70 years in America, has been shaped by kind of like intellectualism.
Yeah.
I'm also thinking about this in terms of like, I imagine you've probably seen this in the news as of recording this, the Asbury revival. It's what, a few weeks old, and there's certainly been some
Hmm.
pushback from, at least from what I've seen, from many folks in mainline contexts, questioning the efficacy or legitimacy. But again, thinking as myself somewhat as mystical, I think, boy, it feels like there's something there. So I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts on like that kind of intellectualism versus maybe a need again, and that's my words, for a more mystical faith experience in mainline contexts.
Yeah, totally. I think that's one of the primary questions we need to be asking as a church, actually, right now. Intellectualism is, in my opinion, it is helpful for practical means, for church polity and things like that, and for helping us make sense of what we've experienced.
Mm-hmm.
But mysticism, with the root kind of word of mystery, and mysticism is primarily experiential for me, at least, and I see it more phenomenological, as a way of um, being in conversation with the world. And
Mm-hmm.
mysticism also seems to hold this tension between the creation and faith, the creation and spirituality. in a way that helps us experience the world more fully and be in service to the world more fully. And intellectualism, has its place. Rational faith, kind of has its place.
Right.
But what I think one of the deep places of hunger in humanity, in the human community right now, is the need for mystery and the need for awe and wonder and relationality, that kind of interbeing that the mystics talk about, whether it's Meister Eckhart or Teilhard de Chardin or something like that, Ilia Delio and all those. And so there's I think there's a bit of a revival in mysticism happening as well right now, as much as there is in, kind of other forms.
Right. Yeah, because again, I'm thinking, and I'm probably caricaturing to a bit here to speak of mainline contexts, and certainly this is not true, or this is true not only of mainline contexts, probably broadly speaking, right, in the Protestantism writ large, I suppose, this kind of like intellectual bias or emphasis. But I think about, again, maybe this is my own bias or my own perspective, but I think about like people go to like a concert or they go to some kind of event. They want to have an experience. Like they don't want to just be like intellectually like, oh, wow, that was a great idea. And that's a good point. Like I don't, I have young kids, so like I don't get out much. How about you, Matt? But like I want to have an experience, and I think, and push back here if you disagree. Maybe I'm applying this too broadly speaking, but I can see like a Bethel or a Hillsong or a Passion conference. It's like that's not I don't love their theology intellectually, but like I can get behind like the experiential nature of like, well, we're going to experience something. We're going to experience God. And I can see why those folks are packing out arenas and stadiums and concert halls.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a Jungian analyst and Christian pastor who passed away not long ago named Robert Moore from Chicago. He talks about that as well, that a lot of people are looking for something that has manna in it, that has that power of connection and energizing us in our connection actually to something divine. But we find it in rock concerts, right? We find it in something that's immersive and experiential and lifts us out of kind of our mundane, ordinary experience. And that longing, that thirst, that hunger is hardwired in us as human beings. And mysticism provides a pathway to reconnection with the world on the world's terms, right? So we're open to the mysterious and numinous quality of the world itself that we understand as divine and that we experience as divine. So it's a way of, religion in its primary meaning means to rebind again, right? It's religare.
Yeah.
And so it's a way of reconnecting us with what we've split off, which in this case is nature, even the deep feminine, the divine feminine, and the visionary imagination. And for me, that's what's most important about kind of the eco-mystical path, is what we need as a culture and a species right now is a reconnection with visionary imagination to help us regenerate and heal a broken culture in its relationship to the world. And if any organization was called to such a high calling, I would hope that it would be the church,
Talk more about that, the lack of visionary imagination. Where do you see that playing out? What are some examples of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, as a student of historical theology, I think the early church really created a room for the deep imagination, for being guided by visionary experience. We see that in the scriptures, of course, with Peter and his dream of the
Right.
wild animals that
Right.
came down from the sky and all that, and it actually influenced the direction of the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, I think in the Orthodox tradition and the Catholic tradition, they still retained a connection to the images and archetypes in a way that the
Yeah.
Protestant tradition
Yep.
kind of eschewed that. It kind of threw out the baby with the bathwater and became a very literate, text-driven faith, which
Right. Right.
supported kind of that rationality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there's a really we sort of kicked out all the artists, priests, healers,
Mm-hmm.
we've kind of kicked out all of the mystics and the saints from the church, and we need to welcome them back home, and we need to welcome them back home in us, to be honest. So that's what really inspires me about an area of transformation or awakening happening within the church.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the ways you're trying to welcome these folks home, to use your words. You've undertaken, at least as I've read in your information, a number of eco-spirituality projects, I guess, to use your word. Talk more about kind of some of those and what they've been about, kind of what their overall mission is, and why you see that need.
Yeah, great, thanks. So I've been kind of experimenting. I guess what you'd say is it's kind of like a circle. Like if the Christ tradition was like a circle, I've been kind of operating right on the inside of that edge and right on the outside of that edge. A bit of edge walking, I guess you could say. Like the and my first project was Church of Lost Walls here in the Denver area, and I began it before the wild church movement started taking off. But the purpose of Church of Lost Walls was really to step across the threshold into a new kind of community that was based on sacred reciprocity with the landscape, to be in a faithful relationship with our own watershed. And so we were really exploring wild sacramental worship, and a connection and a commitment to ecological education and justice as a community, and healing that relationship with the natural world by spending time outdoors, by spending time in contemplative wanders and things of that sort. So that was a really great community and journey, and it really kind of resonated with the nuns and the duns, to say, to use that term, or the spiritual but not religious, as much as Christians who knew that there was something else beyond kind of the walls on Sunday morning that could really help reconnect them to their faith. So, and then the second big project we started about 6 years ago, and it was called Seminary the Wild. And that came up after a 14-day wilderness fast. For me, at least, it came from a 14-day wilderness fast in the San Juan Mountains here in Colorado. And I had this vision of bridging kind of this nature-based approach of spiritual development with more of the conventional, institutional Christian world. And it was a really wonderful journey. I reached out to a friend of mine who kind of operates in some of these circles, and I said, hey, listen, I want to offer these multi-day intensives in nature with Christian leaders and do some of these practices. And so for a few years, we offered these immersions here in the Front Range and Washington, a couple other places around, and there was just a lot of resonance with it, with the work, and some pretty powerful encounters in people's lives. And so my friend and I started kind of asking, well, what is this? What are we doing, and what do we want this to become? And he had this little, kind of whisper one day of Seminary of the Wild, and is just kind of a resonant term. And so we reached out to a couple friends and brought in a couple partners into the work who were co-founders as well, that were really interested in this idea. And we started offering larger retreats. We offered a few retreats at Ghost Ranch with folks like Brian McLaren and Richard Rohr and some others. And people came and were really supportive of what we were up to. And so we launched Seminary of the Wild, and it became kind of this movement hub for eco-spiritual leaders, kind of right on the inside and outside edge of that circle of Christianity. So we had pastors and professors and therapists and wild church folks and activists and seekers that really didn't want to have anything to do with Christianity, but were really fascinated with what we were up to. And the mission was really to provide a container to reimagine this new story emerging at the edge of faith and ecology, and was really focused on rewilding Christianity and cultivating a new kind of leadership. And so it was a really great experience. And as we went on, the four of us ended up, I guess, sort of feeling called to specific visions through this process and practice together. And so we ended up disbanding to kind of pursue different things. And during that time was when the Mythic Christ Mystery School came as the forefront of my vision personally. And it came from a large part of a lot of stuff that I learned with Seminary of the Wild and kind of experience I drew from, but it also came from some of my own dreams and encounters with the divine. And it's Mythic Christ Mystery School is really about supporting personal transformation and social action through a whole framework of nature-based human development and mythic imagination. And we gather with immersions and online community, and it's designed to support this kind of emergent leadership that's happening right now in an age of climate emergency. And lots of really fascinating people kind of from all over the globe. And I'd say it's been a real container and support system for people that recognize a new ancient way of being in the world is absolutely necessary for us in these times. And it borrows largely from the mystical Christ tradition and kind of a Jungian background. And the core of the program is experiential. So it's really about tapping into that visionary realm of the deep imagination, practicing ritual and sacrament, and gearing people up for cultural action that's grounded in the mysteries. And so it's been a real, it's a new project. I've only been working on it for a little over a year, but lots of energy and lots of good feedback. And I'm starting a new yearlong program coming up here in September. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Again, staying with our themes of intellectualism versus mysticism, you talk about that analogy or image of the circle, being on the edge or perhaps darting outside the edge. And again, correct me if, you disagree here, but I'm thinking like, I imagine as a mystic, you're like, those lines are pretty blurry, right? You're like, I'm not even sure where the lines might be at times. Correct me if you're wrong, or if you disagree. Or again, as an intellectual might say, like, this is the line's right here, and we don't want to go anywhere near it, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I think part of what I understand, at least the mystics or the mystical tradition, is an openness to a God that is larger than our conscious understanding of God, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so the idea is, we're being driven forward to step more fully into a deeper purpose and a calling. And sometimes that calling and that purpose invites us into a way of being in the world that is misunderstood, that is not supported, or not valued. But those of us in this journey also know that it's of high value, and it's seeking to get at the roots of the problem and the roots of transformation, and not just for individuals, but to help shape the culture, something like that.
Let me ask this perhaps as a follow-up to the question about boundaries, is at least as I thinking through it in my mind. And I'm hoping this is a fair question. Is there ever, like, would you say, like, within this kind of mystical Christianity, eco-spirituality, would you say, like, there's ever, like, hey, we've gone too far here, like, this is out of bounds?
Gotcha. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it depends, because I think part of the core of, and I don't want to speak for mystical Christianity in general, or mysticism in general, but I'd say what's true for me is, God has sort of planted this seed, this image, this truth, that is not just a denominational truth or a doctrinal truth, but it is a lived and experienced truth. And the idea is, I think scripture, tradition, doctrine, dogma, and all those things are sort of like guardrails in a certain sense, right? Kind of help us, something that's emerged over hundreds of years, sometimes thousands of years, that help us understand the territory that we're living in and what we're moving towards. And so I would say, yeah, there's certain things that go beyond Christian mysticism and probably eco-spirituality, that you'd say, I'm not sure if this is really in service to the world, or I'm not sure if this is really in service to humanity or human growth or transformation. And I think, I think the difference is we're also cultivating a sense of inner authority, a sense of deep subjectivity, so that, but we also have a community and a tradition. And so I'd say that outer, or that edge of the circle, is something that's always there. It's like a tether, right? It's sort of that greater tradition, that greater vehicle that we're standing on the shoulders of, so to speak, as well, that we need to maintain that connection to, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna make a hard gear shift right here and try to play it well. You mentioned maintaining connection, standing on shoulders. The shift is here. I want to make, you're doing a lot of this, at least if I understand your career correctly. You're doing these projects while working in traditional mainline church contexts. Yes.
That's right.
So I think hopefully we're going to have time here to kind of just talk through, like, what it's like kind of being in both sides of these somewhat different contexts, right? But more practically speaking, do you think it's I've often wondered, like, is it a viable strategy for pastors who want to do something new or creative, perhaps even start a new church or some kind of new faith gathering, kind of like what you've done, to still have, a role in an established church, for practically speaking, like a paycheck? Do you think that's a viable strategy that more creative, entrepreneurial innovators might try?
Yeah, the short answer to that is yes. And I would also say it's likely to be the way of the future in this liminal time that we're living in. I would encourage probably everyone to start start a passion project, or to start an innovative project that can be stewarded and supported. I think it's challenging to do that if there's not a community to help steward, guide, and support it. So I'd say that.
Mm-hmm.
I would also say what I do gives me life. It brings me alive in an incredible way. It keeps me centered on a larger vision, and it actually helps the work I do in the church, in my church context, for a variety of reasons. One is it gives me energy and imagination that I would not have had I not been doing these other projects.
Right.
Two is it there's a dialectic between working in the more of a traditional church and working outside of a traditional church in some visionary ways.
Yeah.
That inform each other and also keep the work grounded. It keeps the work grounded in regular community and regular needs and important needs. So I'd say that. Also, I would say it is a place of tension in my life. It's not easy.
Yeah.
In fact, it can be really, it can be really hard. It can be very, very misunderstood. So I'm kind of used to being misunderstood and I
was kind of like, Matt, what is the secret sauce here? If you've got this figured out, can you please share it?
Misunderstood, misperceived. We need a lot of wholeness to do this work. But I would say that the tension is a creative tension if we can bear it. That the tension itself shapes. I'll speak for myself. The tension shapes who I am and who I'm becoming. And without that tension, that level of growth is harder to come by, I think. So I hope that's kind of helpful.
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking, practically speaking, many of the things you said that resonate with me, kind of like this podcast that I'm doing, it's kind of like a passion project. Obviously, it's not enough for me to support me. And there has to be some level of give and take within my church job and jobs to kind of make it all work.
Totally.
And I can imagine that tension of, again, just practically speaking, I'm thinking practically here, like, if someone's like, hey, why aren't you out, or why aren't you in the office more? Why aren't you visiting more people? Why are you doing this weird thing in the woods type of thing,
Yeah. Yeah, that is part of it. It's a perspective shift, I think, for a lot of not just church members, but a lot of Christians and leaders in general. It's sort of like, are you dividing yourself? Are you dividing your time? And my answer to that is, it's sort of like the tent making concept that we, as pastors or Christians or spiritual leaders, we have to be on the edge of innovation and change. We have to be the ones out front who see the terrain way in the distance and can come back like a Moses or like a prophet and bring salt to the church community. That
Yeah, I
has
like
to be a
that.
part of our job. So I would recommend to any pastors or church leaders listening, be bold and be courageous about what you want and what you need to foster your creativity and passion and vision, and help your leaders, help your community understand why you need that and why it's important for the larger church.
I want to highlight what you're saying here, at least as I understand it. I'm trying to scratch notes here as we talk, because I think the temptation is, and I really want to dive into this or dial in on this. The temptation is to see, like, again, to use, your efforts, Matt, or like, for example, my podcast is like, oh, it's just some vanity project that Lauren's doing or Matt's doing to kind of feed his own ego or desire. But what you're saying, if I'm hearing you right, is like, this is an opportunity for pastors to kind of live in, these are going to be my words, Matt, so tell me if you disagree, to kind of feel like they're fully living into maybe their full calling, to be visionary, like you said. And it kind of goes with one of the questions I was going to ask you, is like, mainline church context can be very like laborious, dry, God bless them, soul sucking at times. I mean, clergy burnout is a real thing. So if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like not just to be like, do some kind of fun side hustle. It's like, can be a way to kind of balance your own soul, but also kind of be visionary and future churchish.
Yeah. Future church for sure. I think that's exactly right. The other thing is cultivating of wholeness. I think a lot of church leaders were not trained or did not learn practices to help us live from our deepest authenticity. And so we have all these expectations put on us. We get a lot of projection. We get a lot of resistance. And to undergo spiritual growth in an intentional and focused and guided way adds strength and support to everything we do, because we show up differently in our church context. And when we show up differently, it starts to slowly shift the system itself. So that's another point I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, that's interesting. And again, maybe it's because of our kind of like the way that capitalism has really kind of just entrenched itself in our kind of American psyche, about like the need to feel like we're getting our employees full workload or work effort value for what we're compensating them for. And then two, I think, again, this is kind of a business word, so forgive me here. But I'm thinking of like, can we help churches think about this as like R&D, essentially, saying like, hey, we're not just going to be about managing the institution of this church as is, but think of like, again, kind of your work, Matt, hopefully what I'm doing here somewhat as like R&D that may not benefit like right here, right now, this church right here, but could pay, again, business word dividends in the future.
R&D is a great kind of business, analogy for it, because that's exactly what it is. If you look at if you look at some of the largest successful companies, they have developed this understanding that people need space, they need downtime, they need to learn how to be present centered, even with meditation and all sorts of different things. They need those moments where they're recharged with that kind of creative core of who they are, and that they will actually perform better and contribute more to the company, right? So the church should be thinking about that. The other piece is I bring what I do on a totally different scale in some of these other projects like Mythic Christ Mystery School. I bring everything I do into my pastoral work and leadership development here at the church as well.
Right.
It's just
Right.
translated a bit differently, but it's the same
Right.
kind of principles and guidance, and it contributes to the health of the leadership as well.
Right. Yeah, like similarly, like when I'm like, I'm fortunate I get to talk to all kinds of different pastors and church leaders like yourself, and it's not like I'm just like putting that information in a box and like leaving it here in my quote unquote podcast studio. Like it stays with me, it influences me. And I think if I can elaborate on the point, like when a pastor is doing some kind of, it seems out there as a project or a spiritual endeavor, like there's going to be some kind of returns. Again, I keep going back to these business metaphors. There's going to be returns for the church in their context. Now, mind you, I'm imagining it may not look like what they might want or desire, but I think we can both agree, like there's returns that are coming.
Yeah. And I'm going to be honest here too, Lauren. I think that some of these business insights are originally spiritual insights, if that makes sense. That the business world has understood and integrated something that the church has missed, perhaps.
Whoa.
And so that's another way that as the church too, we can't hold fast and tight to this sacred secular dichotomy, but that we're here to learn. We're a part of an ecosystem, right? We're here to learn and find wisdom wherever we can find it.
That's good stuff. Let me ask you one more question here before we take a break. And for sake of time, try to make these, give me some quick hitters maybe if you can. But you mentioned earlier this idea about rewilding Christianity. I wonder if you have any quick thoughts about rewilding the church, like what that might look like, some easy ideas.
Easy ideas, yeah. So let me define wild really quickly too. Wild is not crazy, out of control. That's not what wild means. Wild is nature in its original state. So the wild self is the natural born self. It's who we were born into the world to be. And what happens in families and what happens in schools and what happens in culture is aspects of that wildness are not welcomed. They're suppressed, repressed, and all those pieces. And a family or a system or a school becomes domesticated in a sense. It becomes, it atrophies a lot of those creative and wild, imaginative possibilities. So with the church, rewilding the church has to do, I think, with rewilding people's understanding of God, rewilding people's understanding of the creation, of what the world is, that it's not just a backdrop or a toilet or somewhere where we dump our toxins, but that the world is alive, it is sentient in a certain sense, it is wise, it has its own wisdom and intelligence, it has that we were designed to be in partnership with the creation. And so one of the things I think that's really important when we're talking about rewilding the church is kind of rewilding our understanding of the scriptures as well. There's a lot of really incredible and ancient wisdom in the scriptures, the gospels, the teachings of Jesus, but also the Old Testament. And we have to sort of like undomesticate the tradition and worldviews that we've inherited as modern American Christians in particular. And so if we can do that work as leaders in the church, and if we can get people out into the creation, out into nature, to cultivate an I-thou relationship, and to realize that natural revelation is a part of special revelation, if you want to put it in theological terms. Natural revelation is the larger context of special revelation, and that Jesus spent most of his time outdoors, sleeping under the stars, and the Garden of Gethsemane, and perched, on the overlooking the Kidron Valley. If we can start to reimagine a relationship between spirituality and ecology that is inherent in our current tradition, we can give people the permission to go with us beyond the walls of doctrine and Christendom into the wild desert of a wild God.
That's good stuff there. I really wish we had more time here to talk, but I got places to be and people to pick up from school. Let's take a break. We'll come back with some closing questions. All right, we're back with Reverend Matt Syrdal. Did I get that right?
Yes, that's right. Thanks.
Syrdal?
Uh-huh.
Good. All right, Matt, closing questions here. I always tell folks you can take these as seriously or not as you'd like to. If you're Pope for a day, what would that day look like for you? What do you want to do?
Oh, man, I don't even know what a Pope does in a day, but I'd love to see our relationship with our indigenous communities around the world healed with a magic Pope wand, and a great apology for the colonizing forces that we've been a part of for centuries, to enter into kind of a new phase, a new conversation with some of those communities.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you wish it was as easy as a magic wand instead of the real work it takes?
Yes.
To repent, ask forgiveness, all that process of reconciliation, right?
Yeah, reconciliation.
Or conciliation. Some people are using that term conciliation, right? Mm-hmm. A theologian or historical Christian figure you want to meet or bring back to life?
I'd love to meet Hildegard of Bingen. She's really fascinating to me. Her life and her work. I can think of a lot. Meister Eckhart, James Cone, probably, Pelagius, Jesus. Mm-hmm. Jesus would be pretty fun to to meet. Yeah.
What do you think history will remember from our current time and place?
Oh, man. I think history will remember the moment where we decided whether or not we will take responsibility as a culture, as a species, for our place in this world.
Whoa. It's deep. That's good. It's good. Yeah. What do you hope for the future of Christianity?
I think that kind of all the unraveling happening right now. I'm a optimist, believe it or not, in a lot of ways, and I think all this unraveling of the monolith of Christendom is a really positive thing. I'd love to see diverse expressions. I'd love to see it be even more decentralized. I'd love to see innovation leading change in environmental and climate conversations. I'd love to see more action-oriented and community-based, kind of grassrootsy. Yeah, even more kind of a small group, local forms of faith. I'd love to see that in the future.
Well, I really appreciate the time and the conversation. Tell folks where they can connect with you, find out about the different projects you're working on.
Yeah. Well, main one would be mythicchrist.com. That's all. Mythic Christ is all one word. .com. That's my website. And you can find me at the Mythic Christ podcast, which I think is on most of the platforms, at least. Also on Facebook and Instagram. That's where you can find me as well. So,
well, this has been a great conversation. Really glad we made the time for it here. Always leave folks with a word of peace. So, Matt, may God's peace be with you.
And also with you. Blessings.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. To learn more about Lauren or the podcast, visit future-christian.com. One more thing before you go. Do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. And if you're feeling especially generous, leave a review. It really helps us get the word out to more people about the podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is a production of Torn Curtain Arts and Resonate Media. Our episodes were mixed by Danny Burton, and the production support is provided by Paul Romig-Levitt. Thanks, and go in peace.